Picture this, it's 7:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. Sarah, a 42-year-old marketing director, sits in her car outside her office building, gripping her steering wheel as she stares at the endless stream of emails flooding her phone. Her teenage daughter texted her 3 times about a school crisis, her boss wants an immediate response about the budget cuts, and her elderly mother called worried about her doctor's appointment. Sarah feels the familiar knot in her stomach, the same overwhelming sensation that's been her constant companion for months. She's successful by every external measure, yet she feels emotionally drained, reactive, and completely at the mercy of everyone else's demands. If Sarah's story sounds familiar, you're not alone. In our hyper-connected world, millions of Americans find themselves caught in the same whirlwind, constantly reacting to external pressures, feeling emotionally exhausted, and wondering why they can't seem to find the inner strength they know they possess. We've been conditioned to believe that emotional strength means pushing harder, achieving more, or simply toughing it out. But what if I told you that true emotional resilience isn't about building thicker skin, it's about mastering your inner world? Welcome to the Stoic Shield, where ancient wisdom meets modern challenges. I'm your host, and today we're exploring 10 powerful habits that will transform how you handle life's inevitable storms. These aren't just feel-good strategies, they're time-tested principles from Stoic philosophy refined by thinkers like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca over 2,000 years ago. The Stoics understood something profound. We can't control what happens to us, but we can master how we respond. In the next hour, you'll discover how to identify what's truly within your control and stop wasting energy on what isn't. You'll learn the power of the inner pause, a simple technique that creates space between your emotions and your reactions. We'll explore how radical self-honesty can become your foundation for authentic strength, and why daily reflection is the key to continuous emotional growth. You'll understand how gratitude can shift your entire mindset, how to let go of what no longer serves you, and how to set priorities that align with your deepest values. We'll also dive into how failure can become your greatest teacher, why mental detachment is your shield against external chaos, and how setting a daily purpose can anchor you in meaningful living. Each habit builds upon the others, creating what the Stoics called the inner citadel, an unshakable foundation of emotional strength that no external circumstance can touch. By the end of this episode, you'll have a practical roadmap for building emotional resilience that serves you whether you're navigating workplace stress, family challenges, or personal setbacks. You'll understand why emotional strength isn't about avoiding difficulty, it's about meeting it with wisdom, clarity, and unshakable inner peace. So settle in, take a deep breath, and prepare to discover how these ancient practices can revolutionize your modern life. Your journey toward emotional mastery begins now. Habit 1. Master your circle of control. Marcus, a 38-year-old investment banker in Manhattan, used to start every morning by immediately checking the Asian markets, European futures, and overnight news that could impact his portfolio. His heart rate would spike before his feet even hit the floor. One particularly volatile morning, after the markets had opened down 400 points due to geopolitical tensions halfway around the world, Marcus found himself pacing his apartment at 5:30 a.m., frantically calling colleagues and checking every financial news source he could find. By 7 a.m., he was emotionally exhausted, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios about factors completely beyond his influence. This pattern continued until Marcus discovered a fundamental truth that the ancient Stoics had mastered. The secret to emotional strength lies not in controlling everything around us, but in clearly identifying what we can and cannot control, and then focusing our energy exclusively on what's within our sphere of influence. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who wrote his philosophical reflections while managing an empire and fighting wars on multiple fronts, understood this principle intimately. In his personal journal, later published as Meditations, he reminded himself daily, some things are in our control and others not. He knew that true peace and strength come when we focus our energy only on what we can influence and completely release our attachment to everything else. The Stoics developed what they called the dichotomy of control, a mental framework that divides all of life's experiences into two distinct categories: those things we control and those we don't. This isn't merely philosophical theory, it's a practical tool for emotional survival in a chaotic world. Epictetus, who went from slave to one of history's most influential philosophers, taught that some things are within our power while others are not. Things within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Things not within our power are body, property, reputation, position, and, in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. He understood that our thoughts, decisions, values, and responses belong entirely to us, while everything else, including other people's behavior, natural disasters, economic conditions, and even our own reputation, lies outside our direct control. Consider the practical implications. You can control your preparation for a job interview, but not whether you get the position. You can control how you communicate with your spouse during a disagreement, but not how they choose to respond. You can control your daily habits and attitude, but not whether your flight gets delayed or your favorite restaurant closes early. When we spend our precious mental and emotional energy trying to control outcomes, other people's reactions, or external events, we're essentially pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. The practical application of this principle begins the moment you wake up. Instead of immediately diving into emails, news, or social media, all external inputs designed to trigger reactions, take 5 minutes to perform what I call the circle of control assessment. Ask yourself, what do I actually have control over today? Make a mental list that might include your attitude toward challenges, how you'll respond to difficult people, the quality of effort you'll put into your work, whether you'll exercise, what you'll eat, and how you'll treat the people you encounter. Notice how this immediately shifts your focus from reactive to proactive. Instead of starting your day feeling overwhelmed by external forces, you begin with a sense of empowerment and clarity. You're not ignoring external realities, you're simply choosing to direct your energy where it can actually make a difference. When Marcus applied this principle, his morning routine transformed completely. Instead of checking market volatility first thing, he spent 10 minutes identifying what he could control that day: his analysis quality, his client communications, his team leadership, and his responses to market movements. He still monitored the markets, that was part of his job, but he stopped emotionally investing in factors beyond his influence. The result? His stress levels dropped dramatically, his decision-making improved, and his performance actually increased because he was channeling his energy strategically rather than scattering it in all directions. This practice becomes especially powerful during crisis moments. When your teenager comes home with a failing grade, you can't control their past choices, but you can control how you respond in that moment, with anger that damages your relationship or with curiosity that opens dialogue. When your company announces layoffs, you can't control the decision, but you can control your attitude, your job search strategy, and how you support your colleagues. When a relationship ends, you can't control the other person's feelings, but you can control how you process the loss and what you learn from the experience. The Stoics understood that this isn't about becoming passive or indifferent, it's about becoming strategically focused. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, confine yourself to the present. When we stop wasting energy on uncontrollable factors, we have more resources available for the areas where our efforts can genuinely make a difference. Seneca, the Roman statesman and philosopher, put it beautifully: every new thing excites the mind, but a mind that seeks truth turns inward. This turning inward doesn't mean isolation, it means recognizing that our power lies in our responses, not in external circumstances. Here's a practical exercise to implement this habit. Create 2 columns on a piece of paper. Label one "My Control" and the other "Not My Control." When you face any stressful situation, write down all the elements in their appropriate columns. Then make a conscious decision to invest your emotional energy only in the "My Control" column. Watch how this simple practice transforms your stress levels and effectiveness. Start tomorrow morning with this transformative practice. Before reaching for your phone or checking any external inputs, spend 5 minutes identifying 3 things you can control that day and 3 things you cannot. Commit to investing your emotional energy only in the first category. Watch how this single shift begins to transform not just your morning, but your entire approach to life's challenges. Remember, as the Stoics taught us, you can't control the storm, but you can always control how you navigate it. Habit 2. The power of the inner pause. Jennifer, a 44-year-old emergency room nurse in Los Angeles, had always prided herself on her quick reflexes and ability to handle high-pressure situations. But one particularly chaotic Tuesday evening, when a combative patient began screaming accusations at her in front of a crowded waiting room, something inside her snapped. Before she could stop herself, she found herself shouting back, her voice echoing through the hospital corridor. The immediate silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, Jennifer realized she had let her emotions hijack her professionalism, her values, and her reputation in a matter of seconds. This incident became her wake-up call to discover one of the most powerful tools in the Stoic arsenal, the inner pause, that crucial space between stimulus and response that can mean the difference between reacting from emotion and responding from wisdom. Have you ever sent an angry email you immediately regretted? Snapped at a loved one during a stressful moment? Made a decision in the heat of emotion that you later wished you could take back? You're not alone. We live in a culture that celebrates immediate responses, instant reactions, and quick comebacks. But the ancient Stoics understood something profound. Our first emotional impulse is rarely our wisest response. Epictetus, who endured slavery and physical disability yet became one of history's most influential teachers, taught that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But here's the crucial insight most people miss. How we react is actually a choice, not an automatic response. Between every trigger and every reaction lies a space, and in that space lies our power. The Stoics called this concept prosoke, a continuous attention to the present moment and our internal state. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing in his personal journal how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself. This wasn't about ignoring others, but about maintaining awareness of our own responses before they become automatic reactions. The inner pause works by interrupting what psychologists call the amygdala hijack, that moment when our emotional brain takes over before our rational mind can engage. When we feel that surge of anger, frustration, anxiety, or even excitement, our nervous system prepares for immediate action. But the Stoics discovered that we can train ourselves to create a brief intervention in this process. Here's how it works in practice. The moment you feel that emotional charge, whether it's anger at a colleague's comment, frustration with traffic, or anxiety about an upcoming presentation, instead of immediately reacting, you pause. This pause can be as simple as taking 3 deep breaths, counting to 5, or even stepping away from the situation for 30 seconds. During this brief interval, you ask yourself, what would my wisest self do right now? What response would I be proud of tomorrow? Seneca, who served as advisor to emperors and understood the pressure of high-stakes decisions, wrote, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. The inner pause represents the end of automatic reactions and the beginning of conscious responses. He practiced what he called evening reflection, where he would review his day and identify moments when he reacted too quickly, using these observations to strengthen his ability to pause in future situations. Consider Jennifer's transformation. After her hospital incident, she began practicing the inner pause religiously. When the next difficult patient arrived, a man angry about his wait time who began cursing at the reception desk, Jennifer felt that familiar surge of defensive anger. But instead of reacting immediately, she took 3 deep breaths and asked herself, "What does this situation really need from me?" She realized the man was scared about his wife's condition and expressing his fear as anger. Her response shifted from defensiveness to compassion, and she was able to de-escalate the situation effectively. The beauty of the inner pause is its universal applicability. When your teenager rolls their eyes and storms out of the room, instead of shouting after them, pause and consider, what's really going on here? What response will strengthen our relationship rather than damage it? When your boss criticizes your work in front of colleagues, instead of getting defensive, pause and ask, how can I respond professionally and learn from this feedback? The Stoics understood that emotions themselves aren't the problem, it's our unconscious reactions to them that create suffering. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. The inner pause is how we exercise that power in real time. This practice becomes especially crucial in our digital age, where we're constantly bombarded with triggers, inflammatory social media posts, demanding emails, news that provokes outrage. Before you fire off that heated response on social media, pause. Before you send that email written in frustration, pause. Before you make the decision based on anxiety or anger, pause. Epictetus taught his students a practical technique. When you are going to meet someone, say to yourself, what if this person insults me? What if they ignore me? What if they act rudely? This wasn't pessimism, it was preparation. By mentally rehearsing challenging scenarios, we strengthen our ability to pause and respond wisely when they actually occur. Here's your practical implementation strategy. Start small. Choose one recurring trigger in your life. Maybe it's rush hour traffic, a particular colleague's behavior, or your child's bedtime resistance. For the next week, commit to pausing for just 3 breaths before responding to this specific trigger. Notice how this small space changes the quality of your response and the outcome of the situation. Remember, the inner pause isn't about suppressing your emotions, it's about creating space between feeling and action. In that space lies your freedom, your wisdom, and your strength. Habit 3. The mirror of self-honesty. David, a 41-year-old software architect in Houston, had built what appeared to be a perfect life. Corner office, 6-figure salary, beautiful suburban home, and the respect of his peers. But at 2 a.m. on a sleepless Tuesday night, staring at his bedroom ceiling, he couldn't escape a gnawing truth he'd been avoiding for years. He absolutely hated his job. The technical challenges that once excited him now felt meaningless. The corporate politics drained his soul. Yet every morning, he put on his professional mask and pretended everything was fine, even to himself. It took a minor heart palpitation during a particularly stressful project meeting to force David into a conversation he'd been avoiding, the one with himself about who he really was versus who he was pretending to be. This confrontation with uncomfortable truth became his gateway to discovering the 3rd pillar of Stoic emotional strength: radical self-honesty. The ancient Stoics understood that self-deception is the foundation of most human suffering. We construct elaborate stories about ourselves, our motivations, and our circumstances to avoid confronting uncomfortable realities. But true emotional strength requires what Epictetus called knowing yourself. Not the idealized version you present to the world, but the complete, complex, flawed, and authentic human being you actually are. Epictetus, drawing from the ancient Greek maxim inscribed at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, taught, "Know first who you are, and then adorn yourself accordingly." This wasn't about self-improvement or personal branding. It was about the fundamental requirement of honest self-assessment before any meaningful growth can occur. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the ancient world, practiced brutal self-honesty in his personal writings. He didn't sugarcoat his failures, rationalize his mistakes, or pretend to be perfect. In his Meditations, he wrote, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This wasn't narcissism. It was the recognition that self-awareness must precede any attempt at wisdom or virtue. Self-honesty requires confronting three categories of truth that we typically avoid: our patterns, our motivations, and our impact on others. David's sleepless nights forced him to examine all three. His pattern was choosing security over fulfillment repeatedly. His motivation wasn't professional growth or contribution. It was fear of disappointing others and uncertainty about alternatives. His impact was modeling inauthentic living for his children, who were learning to prioritize external approval over internal alignment. The Stoics distinguished between destructive self-criticism and productive self-examination. Seneca wrote, "Every day and every hour ought to be stripped of some folly." Notice he said folly, not worthlessness. The goal isn't to tear yourself down, but to see clearly, to identify specific behaviors, thought patterns, and choices that don't serve your highest good. Consider the difference between these two internal conversations. "I'm terrible at relationships and always mess things up," versus, "I have a pattern of avoiding difficult conversations in relationships, which creates distance and resentment over time." The first is self-attack. The second is self-awareness. The Stoics practiced the latter because it leads to actionable insight rather than paralyzed shame. Self-honesty also means acknowledging your strengths without false modesty. Many people find it easier to catalog their flaws than to honestly assess their capabilities and contributions. This inverted humility is just another form of self-deception. True self-knowledge requires acknowledging both your limitations and your gifts with equal clarity. When David finally practiced radical self-honesty, he had to confront several uncomfortable truths. He had chosen his career path more to impress his father than to follow his own interests. He was spending money on status symbols to compensate for professional dissatisfaction. He had been irritable with his family because he was frustrated with his own choices but unwilling to change them. He was also intelligent, creative, and capable of building something meaningful if he stopped hiding behind fear. The practice of self-honesty begins with creating regular space for unfiltered self-reflection. The Stoics recommended both morning intention setting and evening review, but the key is approaching these practices without judgment. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What story am I telling myself that might not be completely true? Where am I acting from fear rather than values? What would I do if I weren't concerned about others' opinions? Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about events. Often, our harshest judgments are the ones we make about ourselves. And paradoxically, these judgments prevent us from seeing ourselves clearly enough to make positive changes. When we approach self-examination with curiosity rather than condemnation, we create space for growth. One powerful technique is what modern psychology calls compassionate self-talk. But the Stoics practiced it as philosophical dialogue with themselves. Instead of, "Why did I make such a stupid decision?" try, "What was I trying to achieve with that choice? And what can I learn from the outcome?" This shift from self-attack to self-inquiry opens the door to wisdom. Self-honesty also extends to how we tell our stories to others. Notice when you find yourself editing your experiences to make yourself look better, blaming external circumstances for internal choices, or presenting a version of events that protects your ego rather than reflects reality. These small deceptions corrode our relationship with truth and make authentic growth impossible. Here's your practical implementation. Choose one area of your life where you suspect you're not being completely honest with yourself. Perhaps your health habits, your relationships, your work satisfaction, or your financial situation. Spend 10 minutes writing about this area with complete honesty, as if no one will ever read it. What patterns do you notice? What truths have you been avoiding? What would change if you fully acknowledged reality? Remember Seneca's words, "Truth will never be tedious unto him that travels through the dark paths of life." Self-honesty isn't always comfortable, but it's the foundation of authentic strength and genuine peace. Habit 4, the evening mirror daily reflection. Maria, a 39-year-old high school history teacher in Philadelphia, used to collapse into bed each night feeling like she'd been caught in a whirlwind. Days blurred together in a stream of lesson plans, parent conferences, grading papers, and managing classroom disruptions. She'd lie awake replaying moments from her day, the student who challenged her authority, the colleague who undermined her in a faculty meeting, the parent who questioned her teaching methods, but her mental replay was just anxious rumination, not productive reflection. It wasn't until a particularly challenging week when she found herself snapping at students and dreading her own classroom that Maria realized she needed a different approach. She needed to stop simply experiencing her days and start learning from them. This discovery led her to one of the most transformative Stoic practices, the discipline of daily reflection. The ancient Stoics understood that experience without reflection is merely repetition. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire during some of its most turbulent periods, made daily reflection the cornerstone of his personal development. His famous meditations weren't written for publication, they were his private evening reflections, a dialogue with himself about the day's events, his responses, and his growth. In his personal journal, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being." But equally important was his evening practice of reviewing how well he had lived up to that intention. He would ask himself, did I act with wisdom today? Where did I let emotions override reason? What can I learn from today's challenges? Seneca, the Roman philosopher and statesman, described his own evening reflection practice in a letter to his friend Lucilius: "When the lamp is taken away and my wife has fallen silent, I examine the whole day and measure my deeds and words, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by." This wasn't self-flagellation, it was the disciplined practice of extracting wisdom from experience. The power of reflection lies in its ability to transform reactive experiences into proactive learning. Without reflection, we tend to repeat the same patterns, make the same mistakes, and react to similar situations in identical ways. With reflection, we begin to see patterns in our behavior, understand our triggers, and consciously choose different responses. Consider Maria's transformation. Instead of collapsing into bed with her mind racing, she began spending 10 minutes each evening in structured reflection. She would ask herself 3 questions: what went well today and why? What was challenging and how did I respond? What would I do differently if I faced a similar situation tomorrow? During her first week of practice, Maria discovered patterns she'd never noticed. On days when she started class with genuine enthusiasm for the subject matter, her students were more engaged and behavioral problems decreased. When she felt rushed or unprepared, she became reactive and defensive. When she approached difficult parents with curiosity rather than defensiveness, conversations became collaborative rather than adversarial. The Stoics viewed reflection as a form of philosophical medicine. Epictetus taught that we should examine our thoughts and actions the way a doctor examines symptoms, not with judgment, but with diagnostic clarity. Let no day pass without a line, without a lesson learned, something gained, he instructed his students. Effective reflection follows a specific structure. First, acknowledge what you did well. This isn't ego stroking, it's recognizing effective patterns so you can reinforce them. Second, identify areas for improvement without self-attack. Third, extract specific lessons that can guide future choices. Finally, set intentions for tomorrow based on today's insights. When Maria applied this structure to a particularly difficult day, when a student had openly challenged her authority in front of the entire class, her reflection revealed crucial insights. What went well? She had remained calm and didn't escalate the situation. What was challenging? She felt undermined and responded with subtle sarcasm that damaged the relationship. What she learned: the student's outburst likely stemmed from frustration with the material, not personal disrespect. What she would do differently: address the underlying academic struggle privately rather than responding to the behavioral symptom publicly. Marcus Aurelius emphasized that reflection should focus on what we can control. Rather than ruminating about external events or other people's behavior, effective reflection examines our own responses, choices, and growth opportunities. He wrote, "Confine yourself to the present, including the present examination of how we handled past moments." The practice becomes especially powerful when we reflect on our emotional responses. Seneca advised examining not just what we did, but why we did it. What emotion drove that choice? Was it fear, anger, pride, or wisdom? How can I recognize that emotion earlier next time and choose a more aligned response? For busy professionals like Maria, the key is making reflection manageable and consistent. Even 5 minutes of structured evening reflection creates more learning than hours of anxious rumination. The Stoics believed that consistency matters more than duration. A brief daily practice builds wisdom more effectively than occasional lengthy sessions. One powerful technique is what Marcus Aurelius called the view from above, imagining yourself observing your day from a detached, compassionate perspective. Instead of being inside the emotions and drama of events, you step back and observe patterns, choices, and growth opportunities with the objectivity of a wise mentor. Reflection also includes celebrating progress. The Stoics weren't masochists, they recognized that acknowledging growth reinforces positive patterns. Maria began noting not just her mistakes but her improvements: better classroom management, more effective parent communication, increased patience with difficult students. Here's your practical implementation. For the next week, spend just 5 minutes before bed asking yourself, what did I handle well today? What was challenging and how did I respond? What can I learn from today's experiences? Write brief notes if that helps, but the key is consistent practice, not perfect documentation. Remember Seneca's wisdom: every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Each evening's reflection ends one day's patterns and begins tomorrow's possibilities. Habit 5. The Gratitude Foundation. Rachel, a 43-year-old small business owner in Phoenix, found herself trapped in a cycle of constant comparison. Every morning, she'd scroll through LinkedIn and see competitors announcing new contracts, former colleagues posting about promotions, and industry leaders celebrating achievements that made her own progress feel insignificant. By the time she arrived at her modest office, she was already mentally cataloging everything she lacked. More clients, bigger revenue, a larger team, better office space. Her business was actually thriving by most measures, but she couldn't see it through the fog of perpetual wanting. The breaking point came during a casual conversation with her 78-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had survived the Cultural Revolution in China and immigrated to America with nothing but determination. When Rachel complained about losing a potential client to a larger firm, Mrs. Chen listened patiently, then quietly said, "I remember when having clean water was a celebration. Now I have hot water whenever I want it, but I forgot to notice." That simple observation shattered Rachel's perspective and introduced her to one of the most transformative Stoic practices: daily gratitude. The ancient Stoics understood that our emotional well-being isn't determined by what we have or lack, but by our perspective on what we already possess. They recognized gratitude not as a passive feeling but as an active practice, a daily discipline that could reshape our entire relationship with life. Marcus Aurelius, despite bearing the enormous weight of governing an empire during plagues and wars, filled his personal journal with expressions of gratitude. He wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." This wasn't naive optimism from a man who lived in luxury. It was hard-won wisdom from someone who understood that appreciation is a choice, not a circumstance. Seneca, who experienced both great wealth and political exile, taught that gratitude is the foundation of contentment. In his letters, he wrote, "It is likely that some troubles will befall us, but it is not a present fact. How often has the unexpected happened? How often has the expected never come to pass?" He understood that focusing on present blessings builds resilience for future challenges. The Stoics distinguished between what they called preferred indifference, things like health, wealth, and reputation that are generally preferable but don't determine our happiness, and the true goods of wisdom, virtue, and character. Gratitude helps us appreciate preferred indifference when we have them while recognizing that our fundamental well-being doesn't depend on them. Epictetus, who experienced slavery and physical disability, taught a powerful gratitude principle. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. For him, embodying philosophy meant finding reasons for appreciation even in difficult circumstances. He would tell his students to be grateful not just for pleasant experiences but for challenges that build character and setbacks that teach resilience. When Rachel began practicing daily gratitude, she started with what seemed like small things. The fact that her business existed at all, her health that allowed her to work long hours, clients who trusted her with their projects, employees who showed up consistently. But she quickly discovered that gratitude isn't about the size of what you appreciate. It's about the depth of your appreciation. The practice began shifting her entire perspective. Instead of seeing competitors as threats, she began appreciating them as proof that the market was thriving. Instead of resenting larger firms, She became grateful for her nimbleness and personal client relationships. Instead of focusing on the contract she lost, she appreciated the 5 she had won that month. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics understood intuitively. Regular gratitude practice literally rewires our brains. When we consistently focus on appreciation, we strengthen neural pathways associated with positive emotions and weaken those linked to complaint and dissatisfaction. This isn't about suppressing negative emotions. It's about creating a more balanced perspective on our lives. The Stoics recommended specific gratitude practices. Morning gratitude sets the tone for the day. Evening gratitude processes daily experiences, and crisis gratitude, finding appreciation even in difficult moments, builds extraordinary resilience. Marcus Aurelius would begin his day by mentally listing things he was grateful for, from his mentors who taught him wisdom to the basic functions of his body that allowed him to serve others. Seneca practiced what he called poverty rehearsal, deliberately living simply for periods to increase appreciation for ordinary comforts. He would sleep on the floor, eat simple food, and wear plain clothes to remind himself that happiness didn't depend on luxury. After these exercises, returning to normal life felt like abundance rather than entitlement. Rachel developed her own gratitude ritual. Each morning, before checking emails or social media, she would identify 3 specific things she was grateful for and why. Not just my health, but my energy that allows me to tackle challenging projects. Not just my team, but Sarah's attention to detail that catches errors before they reach clients. This specificity deepened her appreciation and made the practice more meaningful. The practice becomes especially powerful during difficult periods. When Rachel's largest client terminated their contract unexpectedly, her first instinct was panic and self-pity, but her gratitude practice had created new mental patterns. She found herself appreciating the warning signs she'd missed. Now she would know what to watch for, the financial reserves that gave her breathing room because she'd been prudent, and the relationships with other clients that could potentially grow. Diversification was actually safer. Gratitude also transformed her relationships. When she began expressing specific appreciation to her employees, not just good job, but I'm grateful for how you handled that difficult client call with patience and professionalism, their engagement and performance improved noticeably. Gratitude, she discovered, wasn't just internal medicine. It was relational fertilizer. The Stoics warned against what they called hedonic adaptation, our tendency to take good things for granted once they become familiar. Regular gratitude practice combats this natural tendency by consciously appreciating what we might otherwise overlook. Here's your practical implementation. For the next week, identify 3 specific things you're grateful for each morning before checking your phone. Focus on why you appreciate each thing, not just what it is. Notice how this practice affects your mood, energy, and perspective throughout the day. Remember Seneca's wisdom. A good character is not formed in a week or a month. It is created little by little, day by day. Gratitude is one of those daily deposits that compound into extraordinary emotional wealth. Habit 6. The art of letting go. Michael, a 45-year-old marketing executive in San Diego, had built his entire identity around a company he'd helped grow from a small startup to a regional powerhouse over 15 years. He'd sacrificed weekends, missed family events, and poured his heart into every campaign, every client relationship, every strategic decision. Then, in a single conference call on a Tuesday morning, everything changed. The company was being acquired, his position was being eliminated, and his 15 years of dedication suddenly felt meaningless. For months afterward, Michael found himself consumed by bitterness. He replayed conversations with executives, analyzed what he could have done differently, and constructed elaborate fantasies about the company failing without him. His inability to let go wasn't just affecting his job search, it was poisoning his relationships, his sleep, and his sense of self-worth. It wasn't until a friend